The Eagles have finalised their 53-man roster and we can finally turn our attention to regular season football. But for the Birds, there is still work to be done before Washington come to town. And with that in mind, here are 4 questions facing the Birds between now and the season opener. As always, guys, if you're new around here, make sure you leave a like and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy this sort of content. We want to build the biggest community of die-hard Philadelphia sports fans possible, and we would love for you to be a part of it. And don't forget, you can get your daily dosage of Philadelphia sports content from myself and all of our writers over at phillysportsnetwork.com. The first question we've got to propose is a simple one, but one that's kind of been buried in the rubble recently, and that is who starts at linebacker. While TJ Edwards and Alex Singleton may have dominated linebacker-related headlines as of late, there is a bigger concern here. Nigel Bradham may or may not be ready to play in week 1, and while Doug Peterson seemed confident in his Monday press conference, it's likely that if Bradham does play, it could be under a limited workload after undergoing surgery earlier this offseason to repair ligaments torn in his toes in the playoff loss to New Orleans. With Camu Grugier-Hill already sidelined, this leaves the Eagles with a slightly interesting dilemma. We can obviously assume that in nickel packages it will be Malcolm Jenkins who will enter the box as a third linebacker, but what happens outside of that? Based on the fact that 6 linebackers were kept on the roster, here is how I see the depth chart shaking up as of right now. If this is a reasonable guess, we can assume that the trio of Fort, Jerry and Edwards could all see significant time against the Redskins, but who starts and bites off the biggest slice of pie remains a mystery, and likely will until we're in the heart of that week 1 season opener. Point number 2 is the fact that the Eagles have the same predicament they have had all off season long when it comes to cornerback, and that is that they have got a plethora of young talent on the roster, but with training camp and preseason now in the books, we're not really any closer to figuring out who's going to play where. It's assumed that Ronald Darby will resume CB1 duties if fully healthy, but the tricky decision lies in remaining roster spots. Now, Doug Peterson alluded to the fact that Sidney Jones should be the CB2 to begin with, but he can play inside and out, and it's likely going to mean that Avonte Maddox is going to play the nickel. But Peterson stated today that all 4 cornerbacks are going to get playing time, which does bring up the idea of a cornerback by committee sort of effort, and we'll dive much deeper into that over the course of the next few days. Douglas led the Eagles in interceptions last year and is another player like Jones who has benefited from a strong summer. But it looks as though if we're going to take that Darby, Jones and Maddox will be your starting trio, that he could be left as the odd man out once again. It's a really tricky scale to balance for Jim Schwartz, and trying to work out who to deploy and when is all the fun of the fair. It's a great problem to have from a talent perspective, but don't be surprised, especially in week 1 where Ronald Darby may or may not be able to go the whole hog, to see corners moving around, perhaps rotating on a matchup by matchup basis a little bit more often than we have in years past. Could a cornerback committee effort work? If you want to see that full analysis, guys, that full video, let me know down in the comments. Point number 3 is, what are the Eagles going to do at tight end? Now, obviously they've got an elite tandem, arguably the best, certainly if not one of the best in the NFL in the way of Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. Now, the Eagles did bring Alex Ellis and Joshua Perkins back onto the practice squad, but the point remains there are only 2 tight ends currently on the active roster, and that's going to have to change by Sunday. The question is, how does Howie free up a roster spot? Cravon LeBlanc was sent to IR earlier today, and that may well give someone like Alex Ellis a chance to step up onto that final 53, but either way, the decision of who steps up, whether it is Alex Ellis or whether it is Joshua Perkins, who's been with the team longer, had a 57-yard game in week 2 against the Bucs for this team last year, has a higher short time upside as a result, is definitely something worth keeping an eye on. The Eagles should absolutely roll into week 1 with at least 3 tight ends on the roster. The main question is who is going to be that third man with Richard Rodgers currently on injured reserve. And finally, perhaps the biggest question is, what is the role of Deshaun Hall in 2019? 4 sacks, 10 solo tackles and more hits than the newest Taylor Swift album, Deshaun Hall was among the preseason's brightest stars and has secured his spot on the final 53 as a result. But interestingly, he may have a bigger role than many expect. There's every reason to believe that Hall has done more than enough to beat out both Josh Sweat and Sharif Miller to earn himself the edge 4 role in Philly. This may not be as significant as it was when Chris Long was on the roster, purely due to the presumed drop in talent, and they may keep Vinny Curry out there a little more, but it's important nonetheless. If this is the case, we can expect to see Hall play maybe 30 to 40 snaps per game, which is a hefty responsibility. I noted yesterday in an article how the Eagles will need Vinny Curry to step up as a leader as a result of such a young depth chart, helping to nurture that potential and turn it into production. And this can be read two ways. If Hall does end up above both Sweat and Miller on the depth chart, it rewards outstanding preseason efforts. But it should also naturally raise a slight concern over last year's 4th round selection Josh Sweat, who despite flurries of praise from every corner of the Eagles locker room, has been largely outshined by Hall this offseason. Now this is a question which is bound to take a little more time to figure out, but again is one worth paying close attention to in those opening few games. But I want you guys to let me know what questions you need answering before we get to week number 1. Drop them down in the comments. From myself, Liam Jenkins, thank you so much for your continued support of this channel and of PhillySportsNetwork.com. You can follow me on Twitter at LiamJenkinsPSN. I'll see you soon.